Sexual reproduction plants. Sexual reproduction in plants. Plants also show sexual mode of reproduction. And in case of plant, the reproductive organ is its flower. A flower contains male and female reproductive structure. Which is the male reproductive structure in the flower? Stamen. This is stamen. This is male reproductive structure. Each stamen consists of, this is called as anther. This is called as filament. Anther and filament. And anther produces numerous, hundreds of pollen grains. Hundreds of pollen grains. And what the pollen grain contains? Inside the pollen grain, it contains male gametes. So male gametes are present inside the pollen grain. So this is male reproductive structure, or you call it as stamen. Now, which is the female reproductive structure? Female reproductive structure, that is actually called as pistil. It is also called as carpel. It is also called as gynoecium. Stamen is also called as androecium. How exactly a pistil will be? Okay, so this part is called as stigma. This part is called as style. This part is called as ovary. And inside the ovary, ovules are present. How pole grain contains male gametes, each ovule contains female gamete, egg. Okay, so I'll write here egg. And here I'll write male gamete. Male gametes. In some flower, both of them are present. Both the flower, single flower contains both type of reproductive structure, male and female. And we call such flower as bisexual flower. Example is hibiscus. Whereas in case of cucumber, in case of papaya, male and female reproductive part, pistil is present in one flower, you call them as female flower. Stamen is present in another flower, you call them as male flower, unisexual flower. Okay, so this is exactly the male and female reproductive structure in case of flower. Now, these pollen grain during fertilization, what should happen? The male gamete is here, female gamete is here, egg. So male gamete should fuse with the female gamete for fertilization. Okay, and for that the pollen grain should come and fall on this stigma. Pollen grain from anther should fall on the stigma. That is the first step. And that step is called as pollination. That is called as pollination. That is called as pollination. Okay. That again I'll explain how exactly pollination takes place. Once the pollen grain fall on the stigma, it contains male gametes. Once the pollen grain fall on the stigma, so male gametes are here, female gamete is here. Now this pollen grain germinates. Exactly how exactly seed germinates. Similarly, pollen grain germinates, and this tube, germination tube, okay, this tube, pollen tube we call, this tube extend down along the style, it extends and enter into this ovule. That tube enters into the ovule, and what that tube contains? Male gamete. What is present in the ovule? Female gamete. So inside the ovule, male and female gamete fuse together, that is fertilization take place to form the zygote. So zygote is formed inside the ovule. By the time this happens, the flower fall off. All the part of the flower fall off. And we should remember one thing. Ovary in future develops into fruit. And ovule present inside the ovary develops into seeds. Fruit and inside seeds. And seeds contain embryo. Seeds contain embryo. When the seed fall on the ground, it germinates into another plant. Okay. So this is exactly how sexual reproduction take place in case of plant. Now very important thing is again coming back to pollination. Pollination, what is the definition? Transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma is known as pollination. Transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma is known as pollination. And pollination cannot take place of its own. Two plant cannot approach together or flower cannot come together for pollination. So they need the help of some agents for pollination. Pollinating agents. It can be wind, it can be water, it can be insect, it can be bird, it can be snail, it can be a honeybee. And there are n number of agents which help them in pollination. Now this pollination, they are of two types. This pollination, they are of two types. Self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination is also called as autogamy. If the pollination take place within the flower, it should be bisexual flower then. If the pollination take place in the same flower, or you can tell like this, if the pollen grain of the anther falls on the stigma of the same flower, it is called as self-pollination. And if the pollen grain of anther falls from one flower to another flower, stigma of another flower, and then we call it as cross-pollination. This is autogamy, this is allogamy. Okay, what is cross-pollination? Transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma of different flower. Again in cross-pollination there are two types. One is geitonogamy and another is xenogamy. You can call it as geitonogamy or geitonogamy, xenogamy. Both of them are cross-pollination. Flowers are different. Cross-pollination means flower must be different. Then only you can call it as cross-pollination. Now, whether those different flowers are present on same plant or different plant. If the cross-pollination take place within the same plant, for example on single plant, on one branch male flower, on another branch female flower, and if the pollination take place, it is geitonogamy. Then what is xenogamy? If the cross-pollination take place between different plant, flowers are also different, plant is also different. Like in case of papaya, one plant contains male gamete, another plant contains female gamete. So now the anther, the pollen grain from anther should fall from one plant to the another plant, and that is called as xenogamy. So these are the various type of pollination that we see in case of plants.